Today, as Ray said, is Constitution. Today, September 17th in 1787, 39 individuals signed the document that we call our Constitution here in Philadelphia. It had to go on to be ratified by the 13 states. The rule was that when 2/3 of them ratified the Constitution, it would go into effect for those states and every state that ratified thereafter. Well, the first state to ratify obviously was Delaware. Pennsylvania was the second. We don't get to put first state on our license plate. We have to put things like visitpa.com. You got a friend in Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, because we were second. This is also an important day for another reason. September 17th, 1862. It was one of the bloodiest days in the history of the United States. On this day in 1862, the Battle of Antietam was fought, a Northern victory. To give you an idea how deadly this battle was, in the first 4 hours of the battle, there were 10,000 American casualties. So those of you who've seen Saving Private Ryan, 9,600 Allied casualties that day on the beaches of Normandy, 5 of them. 10,000 American casualties just in the cornfield, Miller's cornfield on that day. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, I'm a Civil War historian. But also, Lincoln was looking for a victory by the Union so he could announce the Emancipation Proclamation. 5 days after the Battle of Antietam, Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, probably one of the most important documents in our nation's history. So September 17th is important not only for the freedom and liberty that came originally to white men in the Constitution, but also September 17th is important because it extended that freedom to people of color and eventually to women. Okay, so that's my plug for September 17th. Now, the Electoral College. We're going to look at it in terms of why do we have one? We're going to look at it in terms of how it works. We're going to look at it in terms of its timeline. We'll look at it in terms of its problems. And then I'll conclude by looking at some of the things that might be going on in 2020. So first of all, how did it come into being? So I heard we have a chess player here, right? So we have a chess player. This is like the Electoral College comes into being as a multi-dimensional chess game. So if you play chess and you've watched the original Star Trek, you know that the game was played on multiple levels on the Enterprise. That's exactly how I want you to look at the Electoral College. Why does it come into being? In Philadelphia, there were delegates who wanted a strong presidency and those who wanted a weak. Those who wanted a weak presidency wanted the president to be elected by the Congress. That way, the president would remain weak and a sycophant of the Congress, beholden to the Congress for his or her position. Those who wanted a strong executive wanted the president to be elected by the people. If they were going to give the president important and great powers, They wanted the people to feel that they could control the president through a national election. So that's the real opening battle. The Hamiltons, the Madisons, the Wilsons, Gouverneur Morris, all for the strong presidency, battling individuals like Roger Sherman, who wanted that weaker presidency. The next thing that's going on is a battle between the delegates who didn't trust us, the elitists. And trust me, they were the majority. That's why they wanted the republic. Versus those who believed in the masses and that the masses, through something like public education, could make wise decisions. Well, in this battle, of course, the elitists wanted Congress to elect the president. Those for the masses wanted the president elected by the people. The end result, again, an electoral college. The elitists truly went out, though, didn't they? With a president elected by an electoral college, judges appointed and confirmed, appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and senators at that time selected by state legislatures. The only elected office coming out of that document was the House of Representatives. So we have that battle going on, elitists versus masses. We have the big states versus the small states. And this was really one of the most potent battles within the convention itself. And the small states wanted to assure themselves that the president wouldn't always come from New York or Pennsylvania or Virginia. And so the small states wanted some type of mechanism to elect the president that wouldn't be based on the popular vote. The larger states, of course, wanted to have more say, more control. The more population you have, the more control of government you should have. The clash ensues, the result, the Electoral College. So picture this chess game being played out at multiple levels. We could go on, but let me give you one more. The Federalists versus those who wanted power to reside in the states. The Federalists wanted a stronger central government. One of the ways to have a stronger central government was to have a popularly elected president. Those who wanted the states to have more say, like they did in the Articles of Confederation, pushed for an election that would be statewide rather than national in scope. And so the result is this thing we call the Electoral College, which gives us a national election of a national office, but in fact, through 50 different state elections, plus now the District of Columbia. So the Electoral College isn't the first choice. It isn't the second choice of the delegates, but it becomes the final choice of the delegates because of this chess game going on between the various interests. Okay, so how does this baby work? Well, let's start with the basics. There are 538 electors. How do we reach that number? Each state receives as many electors as they have members in Congress, in the House and the Senate. Easy example, Delaware. 2 senators, 1 representative, 3 electors. So there are 538 electors. You're saying to yourself, 100 senators, 435 members of the House of Representatives. How the heck do you get this number? 23rd Amendment. 23rd Amendment awards 3 electors to the District of Columbia. 538 electors. How are they elected? In any manner the state wishes. The manner of selection of electors is left up to each state. I've been pushing for it, but the Pennsylvania legislature has not yet allowed Hedtke to determine the electors in Pennsylvania. They could do that. Constitutionally, they could what? Do that, because the manner of selection of electors is left up to each state. Originally, the state legislatures were the bodies that picked the presidential electors. You really didn't have a say. By 1836, with Jacksonian democracy, with more revolutions of the common person having more say, what occurs is by 1836, only one state, South Carolina, does not elect its electors through popular vote. That changed in 1868 during Reconstruction, and South Carolina went to the popular election of electors. So today, every state and Washington, D.C. has popular election of its electors. Okay, we have a vote in a state. How do we determine how many electors each presidential candidate receives? In 48 states, plus the District of Columbia, this is done on a winner-take-all basis. You get the most popular votes as the presidential candidate, you get all of that state's electors. Two states do not function in that way, Maine and Nebraska. Every other state has a winner-take-all system. Every state, plus the District of Columbia, uses a presidential short ballot and a general ticket. So I know everybody in this room, and you Zoomers, are going to be voting on November 3rd. You walk in, you'll see Trump-Pence, you'll see Biden-Harris. You won't see the electors. You'll be voting for people whose names you probably will never know. That's called the presidential short ballot. The electors are not listed on the ballot. When you vote for Trump or you vote for Biden, you're voting for their set of electors. It's a general ticket, which means you can't split your vote. You can't say, okay, I like Biden, click, now I'm going to go over here and vote for Pence. You got to pick either the Democratic slate or the Republican slate. That is called a general ticket. The states employ a presidential short ballot on a general ticket. I'll entertain questions that you probably have a million. Now, the votes are cast. Who wins? Well, you need 270 electoral votes to win. You need a majority of the electoral votes to win. That's 207. Whoever reaches that number will be the next president of the United States. We don't reach that number. People in Pennsylvania are determined to have good government, so they're going with the Hedtke Mates ticket. Okay? And we win the state of Pennsylvania, meaning either Trump nor Biden gets 270 electoral votes. What happens? Well, the election for president goes into the House of Representatives. And in the House of Representatives, each state will have one vote. California, one vote. Delaware. Are we seeing some problems here? To win, you need 26 states to support you. Notice I said states. What happened in the District of Columbia? Sorry, folks, you're erased. It goes into the House of Representatives. We don't need you. Boom, you're out. See another problem? How often does this happen? Fortunately, only twice. 1800 and 1824. One actually made a musical. And we know what happened after that, right?
Jefferson or Burr? Right.
I was going to play the music.
No.
I couldn't make it, but I made it. You guys are not so funny. Okay, so the president doesn't get a majority of the electoral votes. Since you're using a general ticket, the vice president's not going to get the majority of the electoral votes. Where does that go? Oh, let's make this simple for everybody. Let's send that to the Senate. And let's really not complicate it. Let's now dump the state voting and allow each individual senator to vote, which means you need 51 senators supporting you in the Senate to become the vice president. See a problem already? Yeah, absolutely. Once again, DC is out of the running. And you get the additional benefit of we could have Trump-Harris or Biden-Pence. Wouldn't that be interesting? Yeah, that would make for interesting politics.
Does the vice president get to break a tie in the Senate?
No, they keep voting right. The longest ballot was in 1800. It was 36 ballots. That was the longest. 1824 was much shorter because Henry Clay helped put together as Jackson called it, a corrupt bargain. And so that's what happens when nobody gets a majority of the electorate. Timeline. We, the people, right here in the baseball, I promise not to drop it like Hector Maris did last night. I guess we don't have any Phillies fans. It's unusual. Maybe once a year you see a ball like that when the pitcher just drops the ball. But we, the people, will go to vote for the electors on November 3rd. No kidding. The electors will then meet, I love this, on the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December. This year is December 14th. Remember, the founders of our country were agricultural people. So they're not looking at necessarily exact dates. Election day is first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. The electors will meet in their state capitals on the 14th of December, the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December. There in the state capitals, Dover, Trenton, Harrisburg, Albany, the electors will vote for president and vice president. Each elector gets 2 votes, one for president, one for vice president. The votes from each of the capitals will be certified to whatever that state calls their Secretary of State, and then will be sent to the Congress of the United States to be opened on January 6th, and to be counted by the presiding officer of the Senate, the vice president, in front of Congress. Then finally a winner will be what? Declared. We have no winner on November 3rd. We have no winner on December 14th. We have no official counting of the ballot till December or till January 6th. It's then counted, it will be made official, and the inauguration of the president will take place on January 20th. That's the timeline where everything goes well. Problems. Well, Number one, the Electoral College, what? Distorts the popular will. We've seen that 5 times. 1824, 1876, 1888, and 2 that we can remember, some of us, 2000 and 2016. Interestingly enough, 4 of the 5 winners that did not receive the most popular votes were Republicans. And if we look at John Quincy Adams as maybe a forerunner of the Republican Party, we could somehow say 5 out of 5, but I'm more comfortable historically with 4 out of 5. So the Electoral College, at least in that sense, has benefited the Republican Party since the American Civil War. There seems to be something wrong in a country that has small d democratic elections for every office of executive or legislature, or even sometimes judges, where we have every other elected office based on the popular vote of the people. Arguably one of the most important offices in this country, we don't. So it distorts the popular will. The second thing that happens is it depresses voter turnout. And how many times have you heard people say, my vote doesn't really count? Probably everybody in this room has heard that. Some of you may have what? Said, my vote really doesn't count. Well, trust me, your vote does count. And it is counted. But it is not counted at a national level. It's counted as a state level. If you voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, your vote was counted. But it is distorted in an electoral college. So the college gives us the illusion that our vote doesn't count. But it certainly also depresses voter turnout. Okay, I'm going to go to FanDuel right now and bet on the election in Washington, D.C. And I'm betting on Joe Biden. If you're a Republican in Washington, D.C., don't bother to come to the polls. You're going to lose. I'm going to double down on my bet. I'm going to take Trump in Utah. He's already won Utah. I'm going to have the election. So if I'm in Utah, and I'm a Democrat, if I'm in Washington, and D.C., and I'm a Republican, what's my incentive to go out and vote? Because my vote only counts at the state or district level. It doesn't count in any national. And so we have seen as political scientists this depressing voter turnout and giving the illusion your vote doesn't what? No. The third problem I see is, boy, are we lucky to live in Pennsylvania. Because people are paying attention to it. There's only in any election about 10 to 12 states where the citizens are paid any attention to by the candidates. The other votes are virtually what? Determined. If you're Trump, are you going to go out? Well, he did go out to California. That was a disaster for him, but he did go out to California. But why waste your time going out to California? You're going to lose that state. It's the larger swing states that get the political clout from the Electoral College, leaving maybe 40 states in the dust for electoral promises and considerations. To me, that's a problem. Why don't the smaller states moan and complain about this? They're overrepresented. That's a fourth problem. The Electoral College clearly violates the concept of one person, one vote. But there's nothing the courts can do about it. As they've said in Gray versus Saunders, there's nothing they can do about it because it's in the Constitution. This distortion of one person's vote equaling another person's vote is perfectly constitutional. So let's take California. In California, one elector represents over 700,000 people, 712,000 to be exact. In Wyoming, one elector represents 195,000. The small states, through the Electoral College, are getting more bang for their buck because the Electoral College is not solely based on population. Because remember, it's senators, members of the House of Representatives, that determines your electoral votes. If you're a state that has 5 people living in it, you're going to get 1 representative and you're going to get 2 senators. So the Electoral College is not based strictly on population. And thus the small states are actually overrepresented. We like that. We use that. The last thing we might talk about are unfaithful electors. According to the Constitution, electors are free to vote their own will. The Constitution also gives states the right to select the manner in which electors are picked. Today, 26 states, plus the District of Columbia, legally bind their electors to vote for the person to whom they're elected. 24 states do not. You are going to school in one of them, Pennsylvania. If you're from New Jersey, it's another state that doesn't bind electors. If you're a New Yorker, they don't bind electors. Probably, you might have students from Delaware or Maryland here. If you're from Delaware or Maryland, they do bind electors. 24 states don't bind electors. So in those states, they can vote for anyone they choose. Now, unfaithful electors occur every election. Unfaithful electors have never in American history altered the outcome of an election. The greatest number, I believe, was 14 in 1960, the Kennedy election. They've never altered an election, but we still have the possibility that they could. 10 states legally bind electors. The answer is yes. The controlling case was Ray versus Blair. But Chafalo challenged that when he was legally bound in the state of Washington. And this summer, in mid-July, he lost that case. So the Supreme Court has reaffirmed Ray versus Blair and Chafalo versus Washington that states can bind electors legally to vote for the person for whom they're supposed to vote. Okay? So quickly, there's 5 problems. Now, what's going on today? What's going on September 17, 2020? Where you want to look at to as students and faculty to get the latest updates is realclearpolitics.com. Okay. That's worth writing down, realclearpolitics.com. And according to statistics today, if we look at the presidential election, if we look at the popular vote nationally, Biden has been trending downward. And he's somewhere between a 6 to 7% lead on Trump nationally. That means nothing to any of us. If the election isn't national, if it were, Hillary Clinton would be running for a second term. So you say, what's the electoral vote count look like? Today, if the election were held today, Biden would have 212 electoral votes. Trump would have 115. There would be 211 that were toss-up states, too close to call right now. If you had to make the call and award those based on the data, what would the final count be of the election today? 352 Biden, 186 Trump. Ray, I know you were in this room 4 years ago. You heard numbers like that before. 47 days out means what?
Not a lot.
Not a lot. But that's where we stand what? Today. Now, let's go to Congress, because Congress is important too. Presidential election years are great, because not only is the president, vice president up for election, but every member of the House of Representatives is. So all 435 seats are up for grabs. If the election were held today, and it takes 218 members to control the House of Representatives for party to control, if the election were held today, Democrats would have 214 seats. Republicans would have 190, and 31 would be toss-ups. So of those, for the Democrats to maintain control, they have to win 4 of those 31 toss-up seats. They have an easier row home than do the Republicans. Senate is interesting because if the senatorial elections were held today, 47 Democrats, 47 Republicans, 6 toss-ups. With the Democrats having a good chance of taking Maine, Michigan, and North Carolina. The projection right now, September 17, 2020, is a 51-49 Democratic control of the Senate. That's the projection right now. Again, it can change in a heartbeat. So that's where we stand. Who has the toughest road there? The Republicans. Because of the 35 seats that are up for grabs, 30 of the 35, 23 are Republican seats, 12 are Democratic seats. So it's the Republicans that are going to have to dig in and hold on to maintain their 53-47 advantage in the Senate. Okay, so I may have more to say in a few minutes, but I think it's time for questions.
When the people go to the polls on November 3rd, isn't it possible to write in who they want as president and vice president?
Absolutely.
So technically, they could vote for a Republican president and a Democratic vice president, or vice versa.
Technically, I assume that you could. I don't know every state law. It seemed to me to be a wasted vote because it wouldn't count either for Trump or Biden.
In Pennsylvania, with the write-in, are you nominating them as their own electors then, or how, do you know how that works?
Really, they'd be without an electoral slate.
Right.
Those slates are already determined and in place.
Right.
Any other questions? There's probably plenty.
I have 3 queued up, so if nobody else has one.
I was also wondering if anyone at home had questions.
Yes. Oh, we should say, right.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to, you can unmute, and I think we should be able to hear you. Or if you want to type a question into the chat, we can also address that to Dr. Hedtke. But maybe while people are thinking, Jim, I think it was 2 years ago in your Constitution Day talk, I first heard you make some swipes at the Electoral College. And I was surprised to hear that. I'd always thought that was kind of a neat part of our electoral process. And today you really laid out the case against it. apart from this election, what would it look like if we as a country wanted to move towards changing the way we elect the president?
Okay, to change the Electoral College, and I believe, trying to remember correctly, there's been over 5,000 possible amendments considered in our Congress in 1789. Over 1,000 have been about the Electoral College. We've had two changes, the 12th Amendment, and that came after the election of 1800, right?
Okay.
We know a lot about that election.
Right.
The second was a Civil Rights Amendment, more than an Electoral College Amendment. And it was the addition of Washington, D.C. Into the Electoral College. There's been two changes. Two of those 1,000 plus attempts have made it.
Okay.
For an amendment to pass, it's got to pass both houses of the United States Congress in a 2/3 majority. And then it has to pass 3/4 of the states. That's a high hurdle to get any change.
Yeah.
Small states are going to battle to keep their Electoral College advantage. Those 10 to 12 swing states are going to battle to keep what? That advantage. And politicians don't like change. They know how to play the game. They know how to play the Electoral College game. So it's hard to see. I can see if the Democrats lose a third time in the 21st century through the Electoral College, getting the most popular votes, but not the most electoral votes, them leading the charge. But I don't see them being able then to get Republican members of Congress or Republican states to make that change.
I've heard two workarounds that people are putting out there. One is, do you want to ask?
You can go ahead. But
And maybe they're not the same, but the states at the state level resolving to do winner take all to the winner of the popular vote rather than the state vote. And the other one being lifting the cap on the House of Representatives, that right now, part of the exacerbating piece of outsized small state influence is because the House of Representatives is capped.
Let's take the last part first. The more seats you add to the House of Representatives, the more you dilute its power. It's one of the main assumptions of political science, that the more people sit in the more seats in the legislature, the more the executive gets to control.
Because it's harder to find consensus. I
might be for rewarding House of Representative seats on another basis.
Okay.
The first, the states banding together and giving their votes to the person who wins the popular vote, that pretty much fell apart because each state wants to be its own sovereign, independent player. It's the same problem fine with proportional vote. For example, in Pennsylvania, Dominic Pileggi, who was once head of the Senate here in Pennsylvania, pushed for proportional vote here in Philadelphia, or Pennsylvania, I'm sorry. And he happens to be a friend of the family. I'd like to teach his wife. And we were out and he was talking about this. I said, it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. Because it's going to dissipate Pennsylvania's clout. Because we're always going to be what? One vote. If we have 20 electoral votes, we'd be 10 and 10. We'd be awash. We'd have nothing. So the winner take all, I think, is here to stay. And the question is, can we get enough states to go along with that? And would it pass constitutional muster?
Okay. We have a question from Gonzalez on the Zoom. Gonzalez, I'm going to ask you to unmute. And let's see if we can hear you. Try saying something again, please. Yeah, we're not having anything come through. I think the best bet might be to type the question into chat.
Well, we're waiting for the typist. Any other questions?
you say that it is fair that, would you say that it is fair to say that,
Can you hear me? Ed?
Go ahead. Maybe Ryan continue, and then we'll.
okay, would you say that it's fair to say that the Electoral College effectively, not legally, but in effect, makes it so that a lot of small states don't even matter at all because their votes are effectively accounted for already for one party?
Well, that's true of large states too. So the rule of thumb is somewhere between 38 to 40 states are always accounted for in the Electoral College, and the election really boils down to 10 different states. So the small d Democrat Hedtke would be far more comfortable if we had a popular election, so that we took away that advantage of the swing states.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I would answer it. I kind of danced around it.
Yeah. So all that I mean is like looking at the majority of swing states. Not everyone, you know, there's exceptions like Nevada, Iowa. They all, except for a small handful, have like over 10 electoral votes. So they're fairly valuable big states, quote unquote. That's what I meant.
Right. In it took a state. Let me see if I can find one. Let me put it on the TV. If you took Arkansas, for example, is a fairly small state, 6. A switch of Arkansas in 2000 would have made a big difference in the election.
Right.
So the closer the election, the better it is for the small states, I would say, because they have importance. Tennessee, kind of a mid-range state, 11. That's really where Gore lost the election in 2000. He thought it was in the bag. He didn't spend any time in Tennessee. And then Tennessee comes in and goes Republican. I mean, Gore shouldn't even talk about Florida. Yeah, there is no Florida if he had taken care of home cooking in Tennessee with those 11 votes. So the closer that election is in terms of electoral vote, more important than small states become. You have to take care that you keep them in your stable. Any other thoughts or questions? Ms. Gonzalez?
She may be relogging it.
I have a question.
Sure.
Everyone always speaks about the importance of Florida. What makes it so important?
Florida has 29 electoral votes. That's its importance in itself. Secondly, its popular vote is relatively evenly split between Democrats and Republicans. And so it can go either way in any election. Right now, let me look at my cheat sheet again. Florida is leaning marginally toward Biden. That is in fact 1.5% at this point. It's the large number of electoral votes, plus the uncertainty of how that vote's going to go. And certainly by rulings in Florida concerning former incarcerated individuals, help the Republican Party. They're effectively blocking somewhere in the neighborhood of 250,000 Biden voters.
Cool and normal.
I think Rocio's back. Rocio, can you hear us and can you speak?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can? Okay. So I wanted to ask, um, I don't know if Dr. Hedtke already answered this question, but what are his predictions for the 2020 election, since we have seen throughout recent history that all of the presidents that have been in office have served both of the times that they're allowed to. So does he think that this president is actually going to leave office, or because of what's been happening, he is going to serve his second term?
First of all, I'm a terrible predictor. I can remember in freshman English turning to the young lady behind me who I was madly in love with and telling her, Rini, those people from England just aren't going to make it. Those are the Beatles. And then I took my wife to the Palestra to see a young basketball player from Massachusetts, University of Massachusetts. Everybody said he was the hottest player in college. He played against Penn. He got handed his hat by a great defender by the name of Corky Calhoun. And I said, this guy's a bum. I don't care what Sports Illustrated says about him. That was Julius Erving. So I'm not the greatest predictor. Ray listened to me predict how Hillary Clinton was going to win in 2016 at our might have been Constitution Day talk at that time. And you know how that turned out. I would say right now, September 17th, and approximately what, 4:30 is we're at, that Joe Biden has the best chance of winning. That can change over the next 47 days. He has the best chance of winning. And it really depends if he can keep his message on track of hope, of inclusion, of democracy, of caring. If he can keep his message of at least restoring the character of this country, I believe he has a good chance of winning. Okay, if we continue to have what's perceived or is lawlessness in the streets, ironically enough, Trump has positioned himself as the president of law and order. I do believe all this lack of law and order is happening under his reign, but I'm not sure of the logic of that, Joe. That's in your department. But it seems to me that that's where Biden can be most injured, according to the polls. And the polls I'm talking about are reported in the New York Times and the Washington Post. That he may be seen as too soft on lawlessness and not the person that maintained law and order in this country. I'd also say that one thing Trump has in his favor is a loyal base of 30 to 35% of Americans. That's a big base. That's a big base. That's as large as if every Democrat came out and voted for Joe Biden. 36% of Americans identify themselves as Democrats. He already has in his bag 30 to 35% base. So really, he only needs maybe 15% more in many states, in those states, where Biden has a tougher road in that bet. Okay. Hope I answered your questions, Alice.
Yes, you did.
One thing I would say is we have college students here, and most of you probably know Biden has come out with a program that would make pay college tuition for students whose families earn under $125,000. So New York Times reported that this morning. So just something to think about, you know. I don't know which way to go. You might think of the pocketbook, because that's how people vote. And that's really one of the things that's also iffy You know, will this economy recover enough so we feel okay in our pocketbook again? Americans tend to return presidents who are seen as being economically good for the country. You already had your hand up, first time caller, like first time.
First time, long time. My question is, do you believe, as many people do, that this is probably the most important election in American history? And not just in the sense that every presidential election is important, but this is something.
I believe that this is the most important election in American history since 1864. 1864 was a referendum on, do we want to preserve this union, and do we want to end this institution of slavery? Those, to me, are the two most important questions that were asked in American history ever. And that was the referendum. And by the way, there was a huge mail-in vote. The military voted by mail.
And they elected a Republican.
And they were elected a Republican.
Okay, so yes, and here's what I think, Joey. To me, it's a battle for the heart and soul of America. It's a battle for the character of America. I wrote down here, it's a battle between fear and hope. It's a battle between irrationality and rationality. A battle between myth and science. A battle between hate and love. Inclusion, exclusion. Battle between scorn and empathy. And finally, I believe, battle between democracy and neo-fascism. And so, pick the side you want. But it's important, to me, those are important issues. And 1864 is the last that I've seen. I mean, you could argue 1932, you could argue a lot of things, but I think that 1864 was the battle for the heart and soul of this country and its existence, and we're in the same thing in 2020.
Thank you.
When's the last time we had like a mail-in vote?
We've always had mail-in votes. When your current president votes, it's by mail, when he votes. Historically, he was a non-voter. And he actually had to ask Steve on Bannon, how Steve Bannon knew that when they were recruiting. Because he claimed he did. Bannon said, no, you didn't. Here's your record. Yeah. So the biggest mail-in vote was 1864. And by the way, the soldiers in the field, 78% of them voted. They knew what they were voting.
So before 2016 election, many people were really concerned when they were talking about between Trump and I'm really that thing. Clinton. They were really concerned about the international effects that can happen if you voted for a president such as Trump. And since we were known as the leaders of the free world, do you think we can ever regain that title since a lot of countries already kind of moved on from us?
Well, I do think that America, the United States, still has a position of leadership that it needs to exercise. It needs to exercise it in terms of health. It needs to exercise it in terms of poverty. It needs to stand up to and not, I'm trying to use a nice neutral word. It needs to stand up to dictators. It needs to stand up for the values that we believe in. It needs to stand up for the very reasons people want to come to this country. And it may not change anything, but it's important that people, the protesters in Belarus, they may not be able to change what's happening in their country now, but they need to know somebody's in their corner. That somebody isn't praising the dictator, writing love letters to a dictator. They need to know that so that they can continue their struggle to be free. I think that's important. John McCain talked about that eloquently in the last book he wrote. that in fact, that's where our leadership is. It's not necessarily in terms of our military. It's in terms of those things we say we stand. We will live them and stand by people who are trying to live them too. That's where our leadership is.
I think we have to pause there, at least to acknowledge the time. I would like to just acknowledge as well that all the comments, most recent comments in the chat are underlining this idea of voter turnout. Whose base is turning out? Who individually is turning out? Last year, Dr. Hedtke's talk was on voter turnout. And I think speaking on leadership and ending on leadership, despite the indirect way of election, we all still have a hand in determining who will vote for. And I urge you, especially living in a state like Pennsylvania, that you make sure you're registered to vote, you have a plan for voting, you know that the election day is a Tuesday, so wherever you are going to be, you need to be able to vote there or vote ahead of time by mail. If you have any questions about that, you can come to the Wolfenham Center, we can help you out. Ellen and Bente, who's in the back, is leading our voter engagement initiative. We have a meeting next week, Tuesday. Yeah, she had to leave for class. But we have a meeting next week. Come to the Wolfenham Center, be a part of making sure that you do votes. And I also just wanted to pause and give us all a chance to thank Dr. Hedtke for coming to campus amidst the circumstances and challenges of this place. Questions at the end?
Sure. Sure. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming out. Mentally, I really needed it. I haven't been in class since March 12th. And I just needed to be with colleagues. And so thank you for coming out.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
What was the most decisive election aside 2016?
I mean, decisive in what?
Like the leaders that would be a tough choice, like what happened in 2016?
Well, there's been important and decisive elections in American history before, like 1860, like 1932. I would say that 60 and 64 were very important elections, especially the civil rights movement. In fact, a site that I would plug is livingroomcandidate.com. And if you go to livingroomcandidate.com, you can see all the political advertisements that have been on television since the advent of television. It's a really great site. And if you look at Kennedy's ads for 1960, it was the first time African Americans and people of color actually showed up in an ad. So to me, that's a pretty important election, pretty important step. And though Kennedy might have been the face as president, there's a lot of people involved in the civil rights movement. The president that moved it forward was Lyndon Johnson. An odd candidate. Southern.
Texan.
Yeah. Probably the only way you could get it done.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on ranked voting?
On
Ranked voting?
A ranked voting system?
Ranked voting. You know, I teach ranked voting. Single member plurality system. The person with the most votes wins.
For all elections? Is there any?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, ranked voting is good if you're going to. The thing with ranked voting is you get really more what you would call proportional voting. When you get proportional voting, you get multi-parties. When you get multi-parties, it's harder to get things done. Things come up and jam more. Our system was built to jam. So if you have elections that foster multiple parties, as ranked and proportional elections would do, we'd have to have a complete overhaul of our system. We'd have to move away from a presidential system to something more like a parliamentary system.
Some of us might not be upset about that.
Good, that's great.
Well, are the parties written into the Constitution?
Absolutely
I mean, just
not.
to clarify.
Framers really didn't want part.
Mhm.
Didn't want part.
Right.
It's not just what they're seeing.
The factions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on making like November 2nd a national holiday?
I'm all for it. Election Day should be a national holiday. Countries that have national holidays have higher voter turnout. Or things you could do in just a national holiday. I think saying voting is important, then it's important that you get out and vote. You get out and vote, you can't be tied to jobs, school, everything else.
Would you be would you want people to be fined if they don't vote?
No. I think people who didn't vote have already been fined in from 2016 to 2020. So, no, I know Australia does that, right? And they have a 99% turnout. No, I think voting is a duty. I see it more as a duty than even a privilege. And if we can't carry out that one single duty, perhaps we don't deserve a democracy.
Speaking of fines, oh, sorry, Daniel, go ahead.
This is going to the Electoral College, but it has to do with the election. Why is it that in recent years, America can never seem to get candidates who are not younger than, say, 60?
Maybe because they have an electorate that's not young.
A likely electorate, likely to vote, right?
The younger you are, the less likely you are to vote. So in my age range, we're at about 85 percentile or higher. In your age range, you're 30% or lower. So if you look at it in this sense, the baby boomers don't trust the generations beneath them, who are they going to want as their candidates?
So Pennsylvania, younger voters, 18 to 35, outnumbered voters 65 and above.
Yeah, but did they show up?
Yeah, in the Pennsylvania was the first state where that was true in the last election, in the midterm election.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So my thought is, get out and vote and run for office.
And get your friends to vote.
Yeah. Listen, I'm getting to be an old guy. 71 on Sunday. And I prefer younger people. I was like Kamala Harris right now over Joe Biden, but I prefer Joe Biden over the other person that's running. But I think she'd bring a fresher view. You know, we've had our chance and we screwed it up. Go out there, vote. Go out there, run for office. Make your voice known. I mean, that sounds easy, and it is.
So, could you speak a little bit on the tribalism that I think has been increasing in the last couple of decades in American politics? Whether or not you would agree with that statement, whether or not you think that's good or bad, and if you do think it's bad, how we get out of that.
Wait, I'm sorry. I just do a quick pause because a couple of people are leaving. We did order constitutions in favor of Constitution Day. If you want one, come by the Wolfenden Center. They're not here yet. Amazon didn't get them in time, but some come by and pick yours up for free. Sorry, Ryan, back to you.
So,
Repeat that, or yeah.
I got it. I mean, there always has been tribalism, for one. But number two, tribalism didn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. Look at the Iroquois Confederacy. The tribes could get together and work together on important issues, and we did. I've heard people offer hundreds of reasons why it's reached a point where it's a detriment. Probably the biggest point is the 24/7 news cycle in which different news different news agencies really take a point of view and try to hammer that home. I think social media, 24/7 news cycle, have all been detrimental to the idea of compromise. I've actually heard old-time members of Congress say it's also the way that, in fact, Congress today is set up. That, before there used to be far more activity on the floor. There used to be more socializing with members of Congress. I mean, politically, there were two no more diametrically opposed people than McCain and Kennedy. And they socialized together. And when finally Obamacare was passed, McCain stood up and said, I voted against Obamacare the very first time. And he said, but I had just one regret. Ted Kennedy didn't let the seat pass. Imagine anybody saying that today? They opposed ideas rather than personalities. They talked in depth, not sound bites. They had a concern for the nation, not the constituency or the party. How do we get that back? I don't know how to do it. If I knew, I wouldn't be Eric Cabrini and be making a lot of money. I just don't. No, I think, to me, it does start with the president and the leadership of Congress. And you need to toe down the rhetoric. Finally, there's something I could say that I was semi-pleased with Trump. Today, he started calling the Republicans in the Senate and said, pass that Democratic bill. Well, he knows if the economy doesn't recover, he's screwed. But that's what we need. We need a president who can act in that bipartisan way for the best interest of the country. I'm not saying that's the rationale for the current president, but it's at least something we can start to do. Look at it. Some people have suggested term limits as a way. I'm not so sure. Maybe it just exacerbates it in a shorter period of time. Tough question. Yes, I think the answer. Can you hold on again? I think there's a student who's supposed to be interviewed.
Oh.
Just want to make sure.
Okay. Jim, I can get him. Here, if you want to stay.
Okay.
What's the name of the
Mark? Okay. Yeah. Okay, show some hands.
Do you feel like there are going to be more popular candidates that, because of social media, kind of like putting like populist like candidates on like a pedestal, kind of like Bernie Sanders and Trump? Do you feel like we're going to be seeing more and more of those?
I think you certainly have, you are in fact a generation, and it's rightfully so, that wants change. The political parties as currently formed are more conservative and not wanting change, and that you're going to see more populist candidates out there. Now here's the truth from a political science point of view, that in fact, primary elections are historically, people don't historically vote in primary elections. So you get a normal curve. So that's modern America. People who vote in the primaries are the true believers. They're the ideologues. They're the people who want change. They're the ones who are looking for change. They're the ones looking for the populist candidate. So in primaries, you're always going to see these people come out and support a Bernie Sanders. A person like Bernie Sanders doesn't appeal to this middle group yet. And so they're not going to do well in general elections. Because when the rank and file voter comes out that's more moderate, they're not going to want that populist candidate. Now, where does the populist candidate fit in and win? During times of crisis. During times when this group's very beliefs have been shattered. In 2020, if we have a president get reelected, it may shatter that moderate middle of the Democratic Party, saying we can't take this. We got to go a different direction. It's usually times of crisis that shake up the party and bring the populace in. Yeah?
I'm glad that you brought up populism. I remember reading that populism tends to erode democracy. How exactly does that happen?
Populism, first of all, is more likely to erode republicanism, small r, than small d democracy. Because the people want their say, they want to be part of it. Populism can lead to demagogues. We don't have controls in place. They lead to a Mussolini. They lead to an Adolf Hitler. Okay. You can also, with controls in place, lead to a Franklin Roosevelt. Right?
Is populism the opposite of establishment? Is that the right way to think about it?
I look at populism as the opposite of elitism.
Okay.
Where the elites are making the decisions as heads of organizations, government, so on.
Okay.
I look at populism as the people trying to erode that established order because that order isn't working. Black Lives Matter, the populist movement.
Right.
Yeah, the People's Party in the 1890s.
And the establishment can include more or less of that populist movement, right? Or that populist engagement. And if it's less, then it becomes elitism. Right?
Yeah, and you see, taking a populist movement like civil rights in the 1960s, somebody with experience in the establishment like Johnson can take the populism and with his skill as a insider, skill as a lead, take the populist ideas and demands and turn them into policy. Populism can always get out of control. And so instead of thinking of the civil rights movement as a populist movement that was very fruitful in the 1960s, we have a tendency more to look at what happened in the French Revolution. I don't think it's necessarily populism. It's the direction that the people go in that.
I know that when I was reading about populism, it said that it can enhance democracy, and at the same time, like I guess an excess of it can cause the erosion of democracy because of what is described as populist authoritarian forces.
Yeah. I mean, I would call Martin Luther King Jr. a populist. I'd call Robespierre. Two different people, two different views. Okay. Anything else? I'm asking.
Who's on your tie?
What's that?
Who are the people on your tie?
Presidents.
I thought I saw Nixon there. I'm not sure if I did.
Yeah, I have to look over this. There's Clinton. I think there's Nixon, Reagan. My favorite's right here. Lincoln. I have a whole set of presidential songs. I chose Lincoln today because I knew somebody would ask about the important election.
Mm-hmm.
And Lincoln was involved in that.
All right.
I have a question. Do you feel as if the coronavirus is an opportunity for Trump to have a secure re-election since Republican presidents are usually seen as like four-time presidents?
One thing,
Do you feel like the coronavirus could have been a really good opportunity for like President Trump to like have a shoe into 100% get reelected if he would have played his card right?
if he had been like Merkel in Germany, he'd be reelected in a landslide. But right now, it's his biggest detriment. And the biggest detriment. You could argue that the policies of this current administration have cost 150,000 lives.
Almost 200,000.
Well,
Some couldn't be prevented, probably, right?
There might not have been.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Plus economic.
right, destruction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we don't end on that note. Can I ask one question? And then I think we should let you off the hook and let you talk with the loquitur. You started off talking about how people who wanted a strong president were not in favor of the Electoral College because they wanted that control of the
They were
direct
willing-
democratic control.
They would not accept, and they defeated the idea that Congress should elect.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe they accepted the Electoral College because it's the best they could get and could see it morphing into a popular election institution for going away.
I think my sense is recently, at least the last two presidencies, seem to have been leaning towards a strong executive, and even more so, especially recently, without any sense that we want direct democratic control over that office. That sounds like despotism. I mean, is that too stark, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have strong leadership. I agree with Wilson, Morris, and those delegates who said, you got to put this person in front of people. I am sure that Trump is not going to win the popular vote. That I would bet.
Okay.
I can't bet on whether or not he win the Electoral College, but I think he will lose by as many or more popular votes than he did to Clinton. I don't know if that helps put that in perspective.
Okay.
And that if we had a direct national election of the president, Donald Trump would not get a second term.
Okay. Do you think we're going to continue in this trend, though, of a strong executive? Or
Yes.
Okay. And is that because of the deadlock of the legislative branch?
Yeah, and a bazillion other factors.